Welcome back, everybody. I am Follygon, and this is day 31, the final day of Sculptober. Today's prompt is villain, and I'm going to be sculpting Jafar from Disney's Aladdin. But before I do, click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and check out gumroad.com/Follygon for some downloads like my courses, brushes, and materials. It's the final day here, so let's go ahead and talk about the process. So I am, of course, like I said, sculpting Jafar from Disney's Aladdin, starting off with the basic shapes of the head. This character was definitely a bit odd or a bit difficult in the beginning stages, simply because of the extreme elongation of the front part of the face and that kind of smaller skull in the back. Luckily, I got most of that down pretty quick. I was struggling to get the brow in the correct place at first, but I found that after putting some eyeballs in there, it became a little bit easier to figure out where that needed to be. Each character that you sculpt, or whatever you're working on, is kind of like a puzzle. You have to start with something that is most likely going to be incorrect. Even if you're pretty close, you're going to have to make some changes eventually, and slowly you just work and build up the forms until you get to a better place. So for instance, doing things like adding in a nose, like I'm doing right now, was very helpful for me figuring out the plane change necessary for working on the area that translates from the bottom of the cheekbone into that large upper lip. So he's got this really huge, just ginormous upper lip, a giant mouth and jowls area as well. Like I said, he's got that huge elongation of the front part of the face. Most of that comes from that area from the nose down. So a lot of pushing of the standard anatomical form that we would typically see there. I am a huge fan of that kind of stuff though. I really like when the anatomical form is pushed to the kind of breaking point and then nudged back a little bit. That's what I like to do when I'm sculpting actually. Anytime I'm exaggerating something, if I feel like something is pushed really far, I will try to push past that point. So for instance, with the length of the mouth, I would maybe try to make that a little bit longer, right? And then ever so slightly start to nudge that back until it started to work again and not feel quite as broken. So there's definitely some very fun and interesting shapes going on with this sculpt, and with this character in general. I, at this stage, wasn't feeling like I was super close to the overall character, but it turns out that the actual head here was, pretty close. I make very minor changes, but in terms of just nailing down the larger forms, I feel like I've gotten a little bit faster at that throughout Sculptober. Not like an exceptional amount or anything. It takes a little bit longer than just a month of sculpting to see a lot of improvement. It takes quite a bit longer than that actually. But I do feel like I did get a little bit faster. If anything, in that regard, I feel like I've gotten faster at just kind of pushing forward and not worrying about things being, absolutely perfect quite as much. That's actually something that I talk about a lot in my videos, but in truth, it's something that I even struggle with myself. I'm not absolutely perfect, especially when it comes to art. So when I give advice, I'm kind of giving that for myself as well. So when I'm saying, don't worry about the little things, don't sweat it, just kind of push through the pain, I'm kind of talking to myself a little bit there as well. So I'm actually really happy with the way this sculpt turned out, especially since it only took a little bit over 2 hours. I've found that I can accomplish a lot with a little bit of time, and just getting in that daily practice is always a good thing. On to creating Jafar's turban. For this, I of course use our good and faithful friend, the sphere. I also use a little bit of pinching to get this sharper transition. I had to scroll through the movie for a while to try to find some good screenshots to make of good use for the profile of the face there. I find that Google Images can be okay at getting some reference images, but if you want to get the best references for something like this, I recommend going to the direct source. So I found a bunch of clips on YouTube of scenes of Jafar from the film that I just screenshotted and used as reference. After working on the turban a little bit more, I can move on to creating the cloth that hangs down and drapes into the form for the cape, which I end up pulling down a little bit here at first, but then I end up kind of cutting that off for the final render. I try to keep the renders as tight as possible in terms of composition, which means I don't want them to be much wider than they are tall or much taller than they are wide, just for compositional preference for myself. So I work on that form a little bit more, as well as just a little bit of the body. This is just going to be a bust because we're only doing a daily sculpt. I've heard many of you down in the comments talking about, oh, it would be so cool to see you do more with this sculpt after Sculptober is done. And I would love to do that, but I don't think I'm gonna have time for all 31 of these to just kind of fully flesh them out into a full character. I would love to do that, and I have many more years in my career left, God willing. So all in good time. I'm sure over the years I will get to every single one of these characters, but these full characters take a long time to create, and I just ask that you be patient. I really like thinking about the way a bust is terminated as well. I really like the design aspect of that. I think there's a lot of fun stuff that you can do, a lot of clever things that you can do to make those a bit more visually interesting. Some of my favorite interpretations of busts is when they are translated into some kind of cylindrical pillar, almost like a chess piece. That would be so fun to do with a character like this, creating some kind of Disney's Aladdin style chess set, or any other film. I just really like the design and forethought that goes into terminating a bust. We're now on to adding some quick color. I keep this relatively simple as there's not a whole lot going on with the paint on Jafar here. But it allows me to see that we need some eyebrows on there. So after adding the block out for the paint, which is essentially just the main colors there, I can start getting in some quick eyebrows. By this point, you have probably noticed, but I've started to sculpt in from the very beginning a little bit of an expression, a little bit of this kind of raised eyebrow expression. And that was intentional. If I was going to be sculpting this character for something like a film or a video game, I would definitely not do anything like this because you don't want to bake in an expression to a character. You want to keep that as neutral as possible. That way the character can be animated later on into many different expressions and not have kind of this default state where it's already feeling a little angry or a little sad or whatever it may be. But for my purposes here, because I'm just sculpting a character in 3D, just high res, not using it for anything else, just kind of creating for the purposes of creating. Kind of the whole point of Sculptober. So I've baked in a little bit of that expression, which ends up saving me a ton of time, as later on what I would have to do is if I made that a bit more neutral, I would have to add that expression in. And when you add expression or you add a pose to a character, it ends up breaking a lot of the other, or previous form I should say, that you had. So a really great example of this is if you raise your arm up above your head. So if you were to take a character and create it in 3D with its arms down at its side, and then later on you wanted to raise those arms up in the air, or just one arm up in the air, maybe you're making Superman or something like that, the form around the shoulder girdle, which is just the general area of the shoulder, pec, clavicle, scapula, etc., rotates a ton, and there's just a whole lot of deformation that happens there. Your pec stretches up, that's connected to your humerus, you got your teres muscles in the back, your scapulas rotate depending on how far up you rotate your arm. There's just a lot going on there. And the exact same thing is true here when it comes to expressions. So to save some time, I end up sculpting and baking that expression directly in. It's a very good idea for something like this that is a daily sculpt, because I am trying to work as fast as possible, so any shortcuts that I can take to get there a little bit quicker is going to be a good idea. By this point, I've gotten in the mustache, which was created with a quick mask and extrusion. I don't like using the default extrusion stuff in ZBrush, so what I actually do is I duplicate the geo from the face, and I just repurpose that using some dynamic thickness, which is a new feature in ZBrush 2021. Very cool stuff that I enjoy quite a lot. I use it all the time. Then some tweaking around the lips to begin working on that form a little bit more, as well as the cheekbone. The area around the cheek and corner of the mouth started to get a bit softer as I worked on it more and more, and I ended up kind of going backwards a little bit. I had to just kind of erase a lot of that. Previously, it was just kind of in the wrong area, so after kind of moving that, resculpting, adjusting, it just needed a little bit more work. So I spent a little bit more time there. I cut out a little bit of it here though, because if I didn't, we'd be looking at the lips for quite a while here as I continue to work on them and improve them. Time to add some secondary paint to the face. This involves adding a little bit of warmth to some specific areas like the nose, cheeks, lips, and a little bit of some darker area around the eye, or eye cavity, I should say. I insert that really rough at first. He kind of looks a little bit like a clown, but after going back through and neutralizing that paint by inserting the base skin tone back over top of that, he starts to feel a lot closer to the original character. Then a quick beard, which is a similar technique to what I was using in my last video for Beadrill. This involves just taking a sphere, squashing it out, duplicating it into a couple of zigzaggy segments, and then merging those together, adjusting the geometry a little bit, and cleaning it up as I move forward. The gemstone on the forehead is super simple. It's just a squashed sphere into the shape that I need, as well as duplicating that to create the socket for that gem to stick into. The extra form that is around the hat, or turban I should say, is a little bit frustrating, or it was a little bit frustrating for me to make at first, just because the way that wrapped around there, I couldn't get the mask to kind of work the way I needed it to. So I had to play with that a little bit. I ended up redoing it. This is my second time doing it here, and this second time I got it a lot more accurate to the final shape that I was looking for. Just like I said, some of these things can be a little frustrating to deal with, and sometimes tackling them in a little bit of a different way. Taking a minute here to work on something else, come back with a little bit of a fresh perspective can definitely be helpful. And then the feather up top, also another super simple piece. Just a tube of geometry, specifically my cube tube brush, which is available on my Gumroad. Love that brush. I use it all the time on tons of different stuff. I almost used it here for that stripe around the turban, but felt that masks were a little bit easier. But the feather here, like I said, super simple. Just a tube pulled out, stretched, and adjusted to fit that shape a little bit more accurately. Some very minor cleanup and tweaks around the face, but this is kind of the stage of polishing where these little things that a lot of people probably won't notice, but people that spend a little bit more time taking a look at the final image or final sculpt definitely will. This involves just making sure that I am paying attention to all of my fundamentals, so anywhere that edges are a little bit too sharp or a little bit too soft and too consistent, I can go back through, adjust those, make those a little bit nicer. That's what I'm doing specifically here around the brow, as the brow ridge was just way too sharp. The cheekbone ridge was also just way too sharp. So I take some time to adjust the contrast around that entire length of the shape, making the overall brow a little bit more clean, a little bit more soft, and then the line underneath the eye there transition from a sharper edge into a softer edge as it faded into the middle. Also adjusting the angle of the eyes, which is a pretty quick change, going back to the face, thinking about softening some more edges to make things feel a bit more fleshy. He is a stylized character, and there's a lot of room for variation when it comes to stylization, even on something as simple as how sharp you're going to make an edge, which is probably something that if you are not a sculptor, you've probably never really thought about before. But as you can see from my sculpt here, as I spend quite a bit of time adjusting those things here at the end, it is something that is extremely important to the overall feel of whatever you're sculpting. So lots of work there, a little bit of quick work here to the neck to give that a little bit more form so it's not just a plain old cylinder. So I give him a little bit more of a transition up under the chin, and then I go back through to the eyes, clean up some form around there, and give him some eyelashes. He didn't have any eyelashes this entire time, and I had forgotten about them a little bit, and I almost didn't give him any, which would have been a little embarrassing. So I'm glad I remembered. I came back through once again with that cube tube brush, drew in my quick stroke or length for that tube, and then began adjusting it with some masks and my move brush. The main objective here is to just make sure that it is fitting that top eyelid as closely as possible, and then I work on making sure that there's no kind of weirdness or areas that are like sticking out or not lining up. And then the final little thing that I do there to those eyelids is give them just a little bit more form to curl up so they're not quite as flat. I do some other very small little details here, like giving the feather on the turban a little bit more form, and just like the tiniest bit of cleanup to some other areas that's very repetitive that I decided wasn't worth showing off here. But I want to thank you here at the end for watching. This is the final day of Sculptober, but it doesn't mean that I'm done uploading here on YouTube. Just done with doing daily videos for the time being. Might come back and do that again, but I need a little bit of a break. It's been a crazy journey this past month. I have been working on these daily sculpts quite a lot this month. It's been very busy, very hectic, but also a lot of fun. And I thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a lot of fun getting to hang out with you guys every single day. I appreciate all the kind comments down below. I read every single one, but I don't always have time to answer each one individually. So any common questions that I see pop up a lot, I try to answer them in these videos here. Again, I thank you guys so much for watching. Click that subscribe button if you are new around here, and check out gumroad.com/Follygon for some cool downloads like my brushes or materials. With that, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, a happy Halloween, and I'll see you in the next video.